Some shocking footage has come out of Turkey showing a youth group attacking a number of U.S. Marines. We're going to take a look at this footage, and more importantly, we're going to ask what exactly is the deal with this strange Turkish youth group that goes after U.S. service members. Let's get into it. Okay, a couple things to note about Turkey is, importantly, they're a NATO member. So these are ostensibly allies. Now, I want you guys to take a look at this limited amount of footage here that was actually released by the youth group themselves. So there's likely some strategic edits at work, but I want to take a look at this.
Turkey says 15 people have been detained after 2 U.S. Marines were physically assaulted in broad daylight while on a break during a schedule.
Now, I want to point some things out, right? These guys say they are part of a youth organization, but they look pretty old. Like, this dude has a mustache. There's some receding hairlines. There's this man has a large bald spot. This is not the hairline of a young man. And I say this as someone who, started thinning out pretty early. But at some point, you age out of being able to call yourself a member of a youth group. And that generally correlates with, having a receding hairline. I also want to point out these guys are in pretty good shape for, again, members of a political youth group.
Daylight while on a break during a scheduled port visit. The violent scene caught on camera shows several men holding the Marines, who were not in uniform, by force and placing a bag over one of their heads. At one point, one man, unable to break free, shouting.
Now, what I find interesting, here's the thing. There's a lot of these guys that are looking pretty panicked. You may ask yourselves, what exactly is going on here? Well, there's a scary situation because you have to put yourself in the Marines' perspective. First off, you're surrounded by a mob. You're badly outnumbered. Again, a lot of these Turkish youth group members appear to have pretty short haircuts and seem to be in quite good shape. Again, for members of a youth party, but mostly you're outnumbered 3-1. And so right now, no one is throwing blows. And the Marines may be asking themselves, is escalating this confrontation into a fist fight and giving this mob the pretext to hurt us more, is that going to backfire on us, right? And you can see them asking for help, hoping that the Turkish authorities intervene. And it's also sort of interesting that they are in a large tourist area. Generally, guys, large tourist areas like this, they are going to have some level of tourist police. Again, so the fact that mysteriously none of them appear to be intervening is also sort of strange.
For help. According to local officials, a group of 15 people, including 13 men and 2 women, attacked the service members who had been dressed in civilian clothes. The mob, part of a nationalist, anti-American youth group, were immediately apprehended.
Turkey says they were immediately apprehended. And now, also worth noting is that, again, as pointed out, they're in a heavily touristed area of Istanbul and somehow managed to be identified, despite wearing civilian clothes, as military. Now, again, I'm going to point out some things here, and this is pretty standard stuff that, this looks like a sailor for sure. Dude's got huge biceps, but look, he's rocking khaki shorts and a black t-shirt. Nothing on here says U.S. military. Nothing on here says U.S. Marine. So it's interesting that they, again, are able to not just discern that these guys are Marines, but remember, there are 15 people in this group. When is the last time you were able to get 15 of your buddies to do the same thing at the same time? It takes time. It takes coordination, right? And so the fact that this was some sort of staged event, that someone knew these were Marines coming from a port call, is itself very, very troubling.
The 2 Marines who were attacked are assigned to the 24th Expeditionary Unit on board the USS Wasp and were taken to a local hospital as a precaution.
Now, 2 of them were attacked. What they depict here very briefly in the footage, this struggle, it appears that another Marines again,
were physically assaulted.
Running at the crowd once they see the bag go over the head. And the reason is they think that this is part of a kidnapping scheme. And that's an extremely reasonable assumption. And one of the things that they will often say is that when you are being kidnapped, right, is that again, you don't want to be taken to a second location. And so for these guys, initially, this is just a confrontation, possibly some sort of protest. But once it looks like a kidnapping situation, you can see the Marines become much more aggressive, right? A third Marine intervening here, charging in, and you could see trying to break up this group that's holding this Marine who appears to about to be kidnapped. Again, what's interesting is this is just a man with a short haircut. There are some stories indicated that this was another Marine, possibly responding to the yells for help.
The violent scene caught on camera shows several men holding the Marines, who were not in uniform, by force and placing a bag over one of their heads. At one point, one man, unable to break free, shouting for help.
Right. Again, this is not someone who's unable to break free. This is someone who realizes that what they don't want to do is escalate this mob violence. So again, bringing in someone, authority figure. This, again, they don't know how many of these people are or are not part of this mob and how many are just kind of looky-loos. And again, you see a lot of people on their phones.
According to local officials,
you can also see a number of people who don't even appear to necessarily be ethnically Turkish. So again, this is a very strange confrontation. The group calling themselves Soldiers of Struggle for an Independent Turkey, which I guess is more elegant in Turkish, TGB. We're going to break down these guys in a minute, but they're really proud of this, right? They said in a statement, every time you step into these lands, we'll welcome you as you deserve. Now, let's talk a little bit about who these people are. One, the outcome worth talking about is that the Turkish Youth Union, or whatever, tacked in 2021, 17 members were arrested for putting a hood over the head of a U.S. Navy civilian employee. The actions were in protest of U.S. policy in the Middle East. There was also hoods put over members, 3 sailors in 2014 on leave in Istanbul. Again, for the Turkish Youth Union, placing bags over the heads of U.S. service members is a reference to an incident in 2003. Again, I point out, 21 years ago, known as the Hood Incident, shortly after the invasion of Iraq, U.S. troops captured Turkish soldiers, placed bags over their heads, detaining them for 60 hours, probably because no one spoke Turkish, and I suspect because they had no idea who they were and wanted to verify their identities. Again, something that in most militaries would be considered just a routine kind of mishap in war, but somehow it became a 20-year-old point for the Turks to seethe and cope. Now, let's talk about why I find this so suspicious. But before I do, of course, I want to mention that you've probably heard a lot of stories about Russia buying U.S. influencers. Well, I am not for sale. And the reason I'm not for sale, in part, is because I have you guys backing me up, right, over on combatvetnews.com. This is my version of Patreon. So members get twice a week. We do uncensored combat footage breakdowns, and we have, there's also a weekly Q&A benefit, by name shout-outs, right? There's all sorts of tiers. We're running a special or a sale. Use promo code NEWSVET5. Link is in the description, and there's going to be a card that appears up somewhere around here. But that's going to give you $5 off your first month. That literally means the specialist tier is free. But check it out. Now's the time. If you've been thinking about becoming a member or thinking about re-upping, now is definitely the time. Again, your guys' support enables me and the team to continue to do this. I don't have, I have been approached by the Ukrainian government. I have had a number of suspicious messages encouraging me to stop making content or stop saying certain things. I don't listen to any of them. I don't work for the U.S. government, right? I work for myself. So having you guys in my back enables me, is the thing that lets me do this. So check the link. It's in the description. Okay. So Turkey has had some pretty rough relationships with the United States lately, notably because they told NATO to go pound sand and actually applied to join Russia and China's BRICS organization, a different economic bloc. And right, Turkey submitted an application for full membership in a bloc that Russia this year chairs, and it will be considered. And this is a huge FU to the United States. It's not clear that BRICS membership will carry tremendous economic benefits, and it doesn't mean that Turkey's leaving NATO, but it is a sign that Turkey is aligning itself much more closely with not just developing nations, right? Economic, similarly nations, but it is also aligning itself with nations that increasingly welcome authoritarian rule. You can see the BRICS, including Russia, China, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE, right? And Azerbaijan and Malaysia have also applied. You can see that's a large number. That's almost something like 60% of their members are some level of autocracy, right? And so that fact tells you something about BRICS, and it tells you something about who Erdogan considers his friends. Now, let's see if I can find it. There was a pretty mean quote by Erdogan about the United States. If I can find it, be helpful. He basically, or maybe it was Turkey's foreign minister, who basically said the American empire is failing, something to that extent. And it's that's again, not something you say to one of your close partners. And this has been part of a long-standing sort of degradation of Turkish U.S. relations, right? Turkey was a central ally for many, many years, but as Erdogan has increasingly exhibited this kind of autocratic behavior and found itself on the other side of a lot of U.S. stances, it's very, very tough for it to for them to sort of position themselves as a U.S. ally, to call themselves a U.S. ally, right? So some stuff to point out is that one, the U.S. is actually appears to be blocking. It actually designated as part of an act Turkey as an adversary of the United States. Now, one of the things that's also interesting is that Egypt, another who we now know had actually bribed U.S. Senator Bob Menendez, who had been opposing the sale of F-16s to Turkey early and often. And of course, Bob Menendez claims that he had longstanding concerns over Turkey's aggression towards Greece and Cyprus. He says, quote, if they can find a way to ensure Turkey's aggression against its neighbors ceases, which has been great, right? They haven't engaged in that aggression in decades, but he has to call it, he's like, it's got to be a permanent reality. But in fact, it was because Menendez was being bribed by the Egyptians. But Turkey doesn't care. Turkey only sees the outcome, right? And again, you're looking at the U.S. recognized the Armenian genocide, something that Turkey pretends never happened. That offended Turkey. There was also Turkey's relative at the time, President Biden telling Turkey to stay out of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which Turkey didn't like. There's a whole bunch of these sort of gradual degradations of Turkish-U.S. relations. And you can see now Turkey is actually hosting Vladimir Putin, and in a move that's intended to be a huge fuck you to NATO, Putin is demanding that Russian fighter jets be allowed to escort his plane into Turkey. And the reason is not because he thinks that Turkey's going to shoot down his plane. The fighter jets wouldn't necessarily be able to stop that if NATO wanted to. It's as a fuck you to get Russian fighters, Russian aircraft to fly right through into NATO airspace. Something that Putin wants to do to flex on NATO to prove that he is, it's an assertion of dominance to prove that, sort of like, imagine if your neighbor was to simply open your front door, walk into your house, sit down on your couch, and crack out a beer while you weren't home, right? It would be him showing dominance over you, and it would leave you feeling pretty offended. That's the idea here. And the fact that Putin may actually be able to get away with this is, again, a sign that Turkey's head, Erdogan, is increasingly acquiescing to Putin. Right? Now, it doesn't mean that they are besties to the maxi or whatever the kids say nowadays, but it is a sign, again, that Turkey and the United States are not really big fans of each other. Now, I want to mention this Youth Union of Turkey. They are especially an interesting case. So, the Youth Union of Turkey has been around actually for almost 20 years as well. And the party considers itself the union considers itself anti-American, anti-Atlanticists, meaning they don't like the Northern Europeans, basically, and a Eurasianist, meaning that it is pro-Russian, a social political movement in Russia, early 20th century, states that Russia is its own Eurasian thing. So they are pro-Russian, anti-American, anti-Europe, and closely associated with, of course, the Turkish Patriotic Party. It opposes European Union membership and what it calls American imperialism. They have a history of these kind of stunts, as we talked about. But then when you look at the Patriotic Party of Turkey, you can see they're real pieces of shit, right? You can see they control no seats anywhere in any of Turkey's assemblies, which is kind of weird that you're a political party that has literally less than 1% of the vote. And the party has strong relations with strong party-to-party relations with such esteemed members like the Chinese Communist Party and the Workers' Party of Korea. So it is a little bit of a front party. And there's a long history of particularly in the Muslim world, of using these youth organizations or youth entities to do things that the government cannot do and the government's own special services can't do. The classic example is Muslim student followers of the Imam's line. This is in the late 70s in Iran, when you may remember the Iranian Revolution. Right? It was their massive Islamic revolution who not only kicked out the Shah, but also kicked out any of those pesky people who wanted democracy or human rights in Iran. And so the people who invaded the U.S. embassy were not actually members of the Iranian government. But in fact, the people who occupied the embassy actually were the student group who occupied the embassy. And notably, they didn't just occupy the embassy. This is very generous to them. They also held hostage up to 90 Americans. And they were mad because the Shah was going to be admitted to the U.S. for cancer treatment instead of being returned to Iran for a show trial and execution. Their occupation triggered the Iran hostage crisis, 52 American diplomats and citizens held for over a year. And, right, what's interesting is that during the seizure of this embassy, of course, some of them were legitimate students, as they point out. There was general agreement among Iranians and Western diplomatic sources that the 200 or so young men and women who are always inside the embassy compound are indeed legitimate students, right? But many Americans suspected otherwise. Time explained that television images taken outside the embassy showed armed men in dark green fatigues who looked more like combat soldiers. But these men were identified as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And so this is very interesting for a bunch of reasons. One, that these individuals who were inside the embassy were conveniently students through and through. And only outside the embassy were there armed forces, which generally, guys, again, note here that the dirty work of this stuff, the dirty work is being done by this student group. So the hostages were never held by the Iranian government. They were held by the student group. And therefore, it just so happened that the Iranian government stationed its personnel outside the embassy, which was not holding the hostages. No, they weren't holding the hostages. It was the students inside the embassy. The fact that those unarmed students were never confronted by the Iranian government is a question left answered by the viewer. And so I think you're seeing a similar kind of playbook being run here, obviously on a much smaller scale, right? Turkey, Erdogan, don't at me for my terrible Turkish. He cannot sit there and kick the U.S. sailors out of Turkey. They're NATO allies. They're close, personal associates. He could never. There's a long-standing history of military cooperation. But if a student group was to harass these sailors and Marines on shore leave continuously, making it an unsafe environment for them, then they themselves may choose to not have shore leave in Istanbul. So you see how Turkey, and again, as we point out, one, these are some youth groups with some really questionable hairlines and in quite good shape by standards of college kids. Two, they're highly organized. Again, getting 13 college kids in one place requires a ton of alcohol or girls in scanty outfits, and definitely getting it on a moment's notice. And were able to identify in a tourist-heavy area the two to four U.S. Marines, despite the fact that they were wearing no clothing that appeared to identify them as U.S. Marines. So you see how these kind of events sometimes have dimensions to them that are less obvious. And this is something, again, that's worth considering and worth informing the way you view Turkey, our NATO ally. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you to Bill Collier, Robin Colburn, Guyers Martin, Eugenia Cuesta, Chris Gorsuch, Franciscarius, AL90, and Petya Tururu. Thanks to the Lieutenant tier members. Couldn't do this without you guys. Hit that subscribe button, too. It's free. But if you want that discount, the link is in the description. See you in the next one. Cheers.